They say revenge tastes best when it's chilled, but I've always believed it's even sweeter when served just before dawn, with diesel fumes in the air and tow truck engines humming like an approaching storm. Imagine this. You step out of bed because something smells wrong. Not breakfast. Asphalt. Fresh, scorching, pungent. You stumble outside and feel your stomach drop. Your long gravel drive, the one you paid a small fortune for, the one you legally own outside of any homeowner's control, has been paved over in the night. Newly poured blacktop glistens under security lights. The rough crunch of your gravel is gone, buried beneath a stranger's asphalt. Fence posts that had stood solidly for decades now lie splintered in a heap. The survey stakes you installed, hammered flat, bent like scraps of cheap tin. It looks like your property was chewed up and spit out by a construction company with too much time and zero permission. Then comes the letter. Neatly taped to the new stone pillar someone planted on your land, the letter radiates arrogance. The president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, the kind of woman who can weaponize a smile, has the gall to inform you that you owe $3,450 for community access upgrades, effective immediately, with monthly maintenance fees to follow. And she signs it with a flourish, like she's giving you a gift. The irony? I'm a retired development contractor. I've worked with every towing company within 3 counties for years. Some habits die hard. By sunrise, every car owned by that HOA board was hooked up, hauled away, and tucked into impound lots, quietly and legally. Just another day in the county towing network. Their little army evaporated, like dew on hot pavement. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Calvin Mercer, and 3 years ago, I thought I'd found the place where my wife and I would grow old in peace. After selling my commercial building company in Fort Worth, my wife Renee and I bought 3 acres on the edge of Willow Ridge. Rolling land, scattered oak trees, wildflowers that glowed like embers in the summer heat. It felt like a postcard come to life. Our house sat nearly a quarter mile from the main road, connected by a gravel drive that whispered under the tires like a welcome home. And that gravel, that was mine, not the HOA's, not the subdivisions. Private land, purposely deeded separately decades ago by the rancher who originally owned this whole area. His name was Harland Kane, and he had no patience for neighborhood politics. When he sold his homestead, he carved out the road legally and permanently, so no homeowners association could ever lay claim to it. I paid an additional $82,000 for that privilege. Worth every penny. Renee is practical, warm, and sharp enough to cut through nonsense before it has a chance to sting. She runs the counseling department at a local high school. Our daughter Lydia was 15 when we moved, quiet, brilliant, and more interested in robotics competitions than gossip. We came here for quiet evenings, porch swings, and the kind of family time city life always overshadows. For a while, that's exactly what we had. Until her. Until the person who could turn a picnic into a zoning violation and a mailbox into a federal offense. Until the day we met Serena Vale. Imagine a luxury realtor who quotes bylaws the way some people quote scripture. A woman who carries a leather-bound rule book like a badge. A woman who has never met a property she didn't want to standardize. Her pristine white SUV announced her presence long before she stepped out in her tailored suit and designer heels. The license plate read, Realtor 1. And she said it with pride. Serena had been HOA president for 2 years, and in that time, she'd managed to find more residents than the previous board had in a decade. She once cited a neighbor because their wind chimes were audibly disruptive to community peace. I wish I were joking. 58 fines in 18 months, a dozen lawsuits, 7 architectural violations, and a reputation for precision so sharp you could shave with it. That was Serena. But even all that didn't compare to what she did next. It happened on a Wednesday morning in March. I was sipping coffee, the sun just lifting over the ridge, when the ground began to tremble. Not thunder, machinery. Heavy machinery, the kind that doesn't belong on private land at 6:30 a.m. I stepped outside in my slippers and froze. A construction crew was coating my gravel drive in steaming black asphalt. Trucks idled. A roller rumbled forward, flattening everything with merciless efficiency. The foreman barely glanced at me before presenting a clipboard. HOA upgrade order. Signed by Serena. I felt my pulse hammering. This is private property, I told him. He shrugged. We were told it's becoming community access. Community access. They'd taken my road, and rebranded it at sunrise like it was a new subdivision attraction. At the entrance, where my land met their community street, workers were installing decorative stone columns with the inscription, Willow Ridge Estates, Community Entrance, 2024. A plaque. On my land. I stormed to the so-called HOA office, which they rented out of a strip mall space between a nail salon and a tax service. Serena sat behind her glass desk like royalty, perched on a throne of paperwork. She didn't apologize, didn't look nervous, didn't acknowledge she had broken laws or trespassed. She simply smiled, lifted a printed map, and chirped, "We're modernizing your rustic access route. It no longer meets our community aesthetic. Don't worry, we're bringing everything up to standard." Rustic. She said it like it was a contagious illness. Renee would later tell me I looked like I was about to explode. She isn't wrong. The next day brought a certified letter with the same cheerful precision Serena adored. $3,450 assessment fee. $92 monthly maintenance charge. 30-day deadline to install community-compliant landscaping. And threats of liens if I resisted. Renee slammed cupboards so hard the house trembled. Lydia's friends, previously respectful, started treating the newly paved drive like an invitation to skateboards and impromptu drop-offs. Their wheels echoed outside our windows every morning like an unwanted alarm clock. But Serena had miscalculated. What she didn't know was that Harland Kane, the stubborn rancher who sold this land, had written deed restrictions so ironclad he could have used them as a shield in medieval warfare. I dug up the original documents and felt my anger shift to cold determination. This wasn't over. Not even close. Within a week, Serena pushed even further. She installed security patrols on my drive. A uniformed guard in a golf cart rolled up to me like I was trespassing. "Clipboard ready," he said. "Sir, I need to verify your authorization to use this community road." I stared at him. "You mean my drive?" He cleared his throat. "Ma'am said—" "I don't care what ma'am said." Behind my calm voice was a volcano. Meanwhile, Serena filed non-compliance notices against me for not maintaining a tree line that she had destroyed when her crew bulldozed my fence line. I knew construction. I knew county regulations. I knew that nothing Serena had done, not a single thing, was permitted. So I filed a report with the county planning office. 2 days later, the county slapped a bright orange stop work order across her fancy new entrance pillars. And that, finally, set Serena off. She called an emergency HOA meeting, shrieked about how I was sabotaging the community, and convinced her board to fine me $500 daily for failing to maintain common property. Common property. My private road. I received the notice Monday morning. I laughed so hard Renee thought I'd lost my mind. But this wasn't just an ego war anymore. Serena S. The morning after Ward dropped the first evidence folder on my kitchen table, I realized something important. Serena wasn't just reckless, she was organized. A person doesn't buy land through shell companies unless they're planning something bigger than a driveway dispute. And they definitely don't tamper with county records unless they believe they're untouchable. But Serena's problem was simple. She had built her little empire on intimidation. And intimidation only works on people who don't know the rules. I knew very, very many rules. Renee found me that night surrounded by old deed folders and tax maps, the garage lit only by a shop lamp. She set down a mug of chamomile tea and said, "You look like you're preparing for a battle." I didn't look up. "I'm preparing for the whole war." Her hand rested on my shoulder. "Just make sure you win it." I intended to. But Serena wasn't going to make it easy. She never made anything easy. Within a week of the county shutting down her unauthorized construction, she activated the next phase of her campaign: public humiliation. It started subtly. First came the daily community walks, where groups of HOA loyalists, women in bright tracksuits and men with hands clasped behind their backs, strolled past my property at a speed that could politely be described as creeping. They paused to take pictures of our hedges, our lights, the gravel piles I had stored for maintenance. They pointed at our gutters as if they were studying rare artifacts. Then came the Facebook posts in Willow Ridge's community group. Concerned about a neighbor's unusual modifications? Does anyone else feel unsafe? Traffic from one household seems excessive, just saying. I didn't move here for unsightly gravel piles. We have standards for a reason. The comment section filled with gifs of dilapidated houses and people clucking their tongues. It didn't take long to realize who started it. Serena's profile picture, a polished headshot with perfect makeup and a smile sharp as a knife, was all over the thread. That week, Lydia started keeping her curtains closed during the day. "They stare," she muttered, picking at her sleeve. "It's like living in a zoo." Renee tried to comfort her, but I could see the strain in both their faces. I wasn't just fighting for land anymore, I was fighting for my family's peace. Then came the county stunt. One morning, I visited the planning office to request a certified copy of my survey, the one Serena's asphalt crew had obliterated. I'd used that document in countless meetings and legal filings for 30 years. But the clerk behind the counter, a young woman with glossy hair and a last name suspiciously similar to Serena's maiden name, smiled like a cat who swallowed a canary. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer," she said sweetly. "We don't have a record of a private access road deed for that parcel." I stared at her. "It's recorded in Book 147, page 92. She tapped her keyboard theatrically. "Not anymore, it's not." That sentence chilled me more than any threat Serena had thrown so far. She wasn't just bending rules, she was rewriting them. And she had help. The clerk slid a pamphlet across the counter. "You'll need to apply for a new driveway access permit. The fee is $2,800. Approval usually takes 6 to 9 months. I took one look at the pamphlet, then at her smug expression, and realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't incompetence. This was a coordinated shakedown. "It's extortion," Ward said when I told him later. "Trust me, I've seen it before. And guess what? It always leaves fingerprints." He was right. The same week, Ward uncovered yet another layer of Serena's scheme, something that made my stomach twist. She wasn't just buying land, she was borrowing against future HOA income, to the tune of several $100,000. She'd promised lenders she could expand the neighborhood borders, increase HOA membership, and generate new fees through development enhancements. My private road was part of the pitch. Without it, her numbers collapsed. Without me, her entire financial structure toppled. And she knew it. Which explained why the harassment didn't just continue, it escalated like a wildfire in dry brush. 3 nights later, I woke at 2 a.m. to a horrible smell. Burning. Something chemical. I rushed outside and discovered that my irrigation line, running under the brand new asphalt Serena had illegally installed, had been cut clean through. Water spewed upward, flooding the new pavement and soaking the yard. Ward inspected the cut the next morning. "Straight, narrow, precise," he said. "This wasn't accidental. Whoever did it knew exactly where the line was, probably used a compact trench saw. Not a vandal, not a teenager, a professional." And then, as though the universe wanted to mock me, Serena called that afternoon. Her voice oozed concern. "Cal then, darling, I understand you're planning to tear up the road. Unfortunately, that's now part of our community infrastructure. Any modifications require board approval and a $6,000 deposit for potential damages." My jaw clenched. "You damaged it." "Oh," she said innocently, "I'm sure you believe that." I hung up before something in my brain snapped. That night, Ward dropped another packet on my table. This one contained aerial photos of the land Serena's shell companies were buying around mine. "She's building a development empire," he said, "and she needs your property to finish it." "How much time do I have?" I asked. Ward smirked. Judging by her finances, not long. He wasn't exaggerating. Serena had overextended herself so severely that missing 1 or 2 loan payments would push her into bankruptcy, which meant she needed my road fast and was willing to do anything to get it. That's when she made her biggest move yet. She hired a law firm. Not some local attorney, a real estate litigation firm from Austin known for bulldozing small property owners. A certified letter arrived from them within days. Their complaint? That my survey markers were obstructing community development. Their demand? that I remove all signs, markers, and barriers or face a $60,000 lawsuit for destroying shared property. Shared property. My private road was now, according to them, belonging to the community. I stared at the letter until the words blurred. Renee found me a moment later, her breath catching when she read the notice. "She's trying to drain us financially," she whispered. "She's trying to make us fold," I said. "And you won't," she added. "No," I said. What Serena didn't realize was that every aggressive move she made dug her hole deeper. She wanted to intimidate, she wanted to control, she wanted to push me off my land. Instead, she gave me ammunition. She didn't know that her fake complaints violated civil rights laws if used to interfere with employment. She didn't know that tampering with municipal records crossed into criminal territory. She didn't know that cutting irrigation lines constituted felony vandalism. She didn't know that surveillance cameras were catching every incident. She didn't know that her shell companies were next on Ward's target list. She didn't know that I had an attorney of my own in mind, a woman who once put a Fortune 500 developer into bankruptcy for zoning fraud. Serena didn't understand that the minute she turned this into a war, she also turned me into the one person she never wanted to face. A man with nothing to lose, nothing to fear, and everything documented. The pressure on the neighborhood mounted too. Whispers spread. A few brave residents quietly approached me one evening. Like Henry Walsh, a retired Navy engineer with a limp and a talent for reading people. He caught me near my mailbox one evening and said, "She did the same thing to the Jacobs family 2 years ago, tried to force them to sell their side lot so she could build a tennis court for the subdivision extension. Only reason she backed off was because they moved and left town." Then there was Dr. Miriam Estes, a pediatrician with calm eyes behind her glasses. "She fined me 8 times in 1 year, once because my daughter's tricycle was visible from the sidewalk." Little by little, the truth came out. Serena had bullied anyone who resisted her plans. Some she intimidated with fines, others she pressured with lawsuits, some she bribed. Many she scared into silence, but she'd never faced someone who fought back. And that terrified her. Which is why desperation made her reckless, and her recklessness made her dangerous. Because one morning, as I walked down the restored gravel path behind my house, I found something that made my blood run cold. A trail camera, one of Marcus's, hidden in an oak, captured someone trespassing at 3 a.m. A person wearing all black, hoodie, gloves, flashlight. Someone carrying a canister and pouring it along the fence line. I showed the footage to Ward. He didn't blink. "That's herbicide, a strong one. They're trying to kill your yard again." Sure enough, within days, patches of grass turned brown. My rose bushes wilted. A sapling oak turned gray as ash. But the worst part? When Ward zoomed in, you could make out half the intruder's face, and it wasn't a stranger. It was Brandon Vale, Serena's nephew. The same nephew who had somehow been hired as the new community assistant by the HOA only a few weeks earlier. 3 days after that incident, the county tax office unexpectedly reclassified my land as... The first true crack in Serena's armor didn't come from anything dramatic. No midnight trespassing, no sabotage, no fine slipped under my door. It came from something far quieter, far more telling. A man with a dog. Marcus Hale, a retired Marine who lived 3 houses down, stopped me one evening during his usual dusk walk. His German Shepherd, an old battle-scarred dog named Titan, walked beside him with loyal gravity. "You got a minute?" Marcus asked, his voice low. I nodded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "You'll want to see this. Night footage from Titan's collar cam." Titan wore a small body camera when Marcus took him on nighttime walks. Old habits die hard for military men. And sure enough, that footage showed something frighteningly familiar. Serena's security guard blocking the path in front of our mailbox. Serena reading papers in her car at 1 a.m. facing our house. Brandon, the nephew, poking around our side yard with a flashlight. And 2 board members whispering near my driveway markers. "Why are you helping me?" I asked finally. Marcus scratched Titan behind his ear. "Because bullies only win when good people stay quiet, and she's been winning for too long." He walked away without waiting for thanks. That night I watched the footage twice. By the 3rd viewing, a plan began forming. Something deeper, broader, more coordinated than anything I had attempted yet. But Serena wasn't done escalating. Not even close. The next morning, Renee came home from work, pale and visibly shaken. She sat at the kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she set down her purse. "What happened?" I asked. She looked up at me, eyes full of a fear I hadn't seen since our early marriage, when money was tight and the future uncertain. "Calvin," she said slowly, "someone spoke to the superintendent about you." I felt my stomach drop. "What did they say?" "That your aggressive legal actions might reflect poorly on my judgment," she whispered. "They implied the school district needed to be careful about who they represent." I stared at her. My wife, who had dedicated 2 decades to helping teenagers navigate their mental health. My wife who had saved kids from addiction, abuse, depression, and worse. My wife who was respected by every teacher and counselor in that district. Someone was attacking her job. For leverage. And it didn't take a genius to know who was behind it. Renee swallowed hard. "I could lose my position, Cal." That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a property dispute. This was warfare. Serena had taken the conflict out of HOA meetings and county filings and dragged it into my home, into my marriage, into my wife's livelihood. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles whitened. "She crossed a line," I said quietly. Renee nodded solemnly. "Then make sure she regrets it." 2 days later, things got even worse. A white SUV pulled into our driveway while Lydia was walking to check the mail. The car stopped abruptly, blocking her path. She froze, unsure whether to run or stay. The driver's side window rolled down, and there she was, Serena. She leaned out with a saccharine smile that made my skin crawl. "Sweetheart, could you tell your father he's rejecting a very generous offer?" Serena said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm prepared to make life easier for all of you. All he has to do is sign a little paper." Lydia took a step back. I'm not supposed to—" "Oh, relax," she snapped. "You're in a community, dear. People talk all the time." Then she said something that made my blood ice over when Lydia recounted it later. "It would be a shame if all this drama affected your college applications. Admissions offices don't like instability." A threat. To my daughter. From that moment on, I knew the gloves were off. You don't threaten a man's child. You don't put fear in a 15-year-old's eyes and expect him to walk away quietly. That afternoon, Ward arrived with another thick folder. He opened it slowly, methodically, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I'm past ready." He spread out a series of documents and photographs. "Serena isn't just overextended, she's drowning," Ward said. He pointed to a spreadsheet showing loan balances and interest rates. She borrowed nearly $400,000 through 4 shell companies, all approved based on projected income from properties she doesn't legally own yet. My driveway, my land, the missing piece. "The lenders don't know the land isn't hers," Ward continued. "She falsified usage rights on at least 2 loan applications. That's bank fraud." He showed me a timeline. "She has 2 months before those balloon payments hit. If she doesn't secure your land before then, everything collapses." I sat back. So she's desperate. "Desperate is an understatement," Ward said. "She's cornered. And cornered people lash out." I didn't have to imagine it. I had already lived it. And the worst was yet to come. 3 nights later, the sabotage escalated into something almost theatrical. Around 12:30 a.m., I was awakened by the rumble of engines. 2 unmarked trucks rolled down my road, floodlights mounted on their sides illuminating everything like a football field. I threw on jeans and boots and rushed outside. A crew, at least 8 men, were installing speed bumps, signposts, and "no parking, residents only" signs along the asphalt Serena had illegally poured. They moved with military precision, like they'd done this dozens of times. At the entrance, Serena stood with a clipboard, wearing a bright pink tracksuit and white sneakers that practically glowed under the floodlights. She barked instructions like a foreman on a highway project. "This needs to be ADA compliant. Install the reflector posts closer together. Make sure the speed bump is regulation height. We want everything uniform." I stood there slack-jawed. She was creating more community improvements so she could argue my road was permanently integrated into the subdivision. Evidence. A paper trail. A foundation for future claims. She was creating a story to support her lie. But what she didn't know was that Marcus had already installed motion-triggered cameras all along the property. They were recording the entire spectacle in high definition. The trucks, the tools, the crew, the signs, and Serena at the center of it all. Renee came up beside me, wrapping her rope tighter around her. "She's lost her mind," she whispered. "No," I said. "She's losing everything. This is her last push." We stood silently as Serena strutted around like she was directing a movie scene. At one point she yelled, "Make sure the cameras see everything. We need documentation." She was right. The cameras did see everything. Not the one she thought. The next day brought the event that nearly pushed me over the edge. Renee was loading groceries into her car in the school parking lot when Serena approached her again, this time with a proposition. "I know this has been difficult," Serena said in a syrupy tone, "so the board and I want to offer you $30,000 under the table. Just a kindness, a gesture, something to help your family while Calvin works through his issues." Renee froze. "And all he has to do is withdraw those ridiculous lawsuits and stop blocking our development. Everyone wins." She actually said "our development," as if our land belonged to her. But the part that turned an insult into a confession was this: "It'll come from the Community Enrichment Fund. Nobody will know." Renee had seen enough to know exactly what to do. She hit record on her phone before Serena even finished speaking. When she got home and played the video for me, I felt every muscle in my jaw tighten. Serena wasn't just trying to bribe us. She was using HOA funds, homeowner dues, for side payments. That was embezzlement, grand theft, fraud, financial abuse of authority. Pick a law, she was breaking it. Ward watched the video and laughed in disbelief. "That's it," he said. "That's the nail in the coffin. She'll go down hard for this." Renee wrapped her arms around herself, visibly shaken. "She came to my job. She approached me in the school parking lot. What if she comes again?" "She won't," I said, a quiet promise burning in my chest. But Serena wasn't finished unraveling. 2 weeks later, the harassment shifted from petty to criminal. Fake complaints flooded the fire marshal's office accusing me of storing hazardous chemicals in my garage. A full inspection team showed up with masks, gear, and a warrant. They found nothing but tools, paint cans, and an old generator. 2 days after that, Child Protective Services arrived at our door to investigate a report that our home environment was dangerously unstable. The social worker left. Serena's arrest should have been the end of everything, but when a person like her finally hits the ground, they don't simply land, they scatter. They claw, grasp, lash out, grasping for anything within reach, and in doing so, they drag everyone around them into the fall. 3 days after the Saturday morning showdown on my property, you could practically smell the panic drifting through Willow Ridge. The subdivision had gone quiet in the way forests do before a storm, still, tense, whispering with the rustle of danger. Car windows cracked open slowly as neighbors passed each other. People spoke in hushed tones on their porches. Even the neighborhood kids, usually screaming through sprinklers or riding bikes, seemed aware that something massive had shifted, because the queen of their little empire was sitting in county jail with a $50,000 bond. And her kingdom, as it turned out, was built on quicksand. The fallout began immediately. The HOA board, once smug and stiff-spined, suddenly melted into chaos. Half claimed ignorance. A few tried to resign in a panic. One insisted her signature had been forged on several documents. Another started loudly accusing Serena of mismanaging funds. He'd been her biggest supporter just a week earlier. Their emergency meeting that Monday lasted until nearly midnight. I know, because half the neighborhood filmed the arguments through the community center windows. Drama like this travels faster than wildfire on dry grass. By Tuesday morning, Serena's mugshot, hair frizzed, mascara streaked, the expression of someone who had finally run out of justifications, circulated the community Facebook group. Within hours, it spread farther, hitting local news sites, then regional outlets. The headline that attached itself to her like a parasite read, "HOA president arrested in property dispute, gone too far." But that was just the appetizer, because one reporter, Sarah Brent, the one who had quietly interviewed Marcus and neighbors months ago, had been waiting for exactly this spark. With Serena behind bars, Sarah went live with a story she had been building piece by piece. Financial irregularities inside Willow Ridge HOA raised serious concerns. It exploded online. And it caught the attention of people Serena never wanted involved. The county auditor's office, the state's attorney general, the Department of Environmental Quality, and a handful of very curious banks. Serena posted bail on Wednesday, but she didn't walk out triumphant. She walked out into a swarm of reporters whose microphones hit her with more force than any physical blow. "Miss Vale, did you authorize unpermitted construction? Did you harass residents? Do you have comments on the financial discrepancies? Are you facing civil lawsuits from multiple neighbors?" Every time she tried to speak, someone shouted a new question. Cameras flashed like lightning. By the time she got to her SUV, she looked physically rattled, something I hadn't thought possible after watching her torment an entire neighborhood with a smile. Her attorney shoved her into the passenger seat, and the SUV screeched away. Word watched the news clip with me at my kitchen table. "She's done," he said simply. "She just doesn't know how done." I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But the evidence folder sitting in front of me reminded me of every threat, every trespass, every lie, every attempt to unravel my family's life. No, I didn't feel bad. Not even an ounce. What came next was what Word had promised from the beginning: the dominoes. The first to fall was the county commissioner's office. In an attempt to distance themselves, they announced an internal review of all permits Serena had submitted. That review uncovered something that made the front-page news within hours: 17 approvals, signed without on-site inspections. 17! All linked to Serena, all tied to her shell companies, all funneled through the same county official, Commissioner Marvin Blake, Serena's brother-in-law. Within a week, he was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. People started whispering corruption like it was a contagious disease. Then came the environmental agency. Turns out the unauthorized asphalt poured on my road diverted natural runoff into a protected drainage area. That earned Serena, and by extension the HOA, federal scrutiny. Next came the banks. Word discovered that Serena had leveraged the anticipated expanded HOA boundaries as collateral for multiple loans. Once the banks realized her claims were false, they froze every account tied to her shell companies. Her financial empire didn't collapse slowly, it imploded. Property she had bought started falling into foreclosure. Contractors filed liens. A construction supplier sued for unpaid invoices. Every day brought a new blow. I watched the carnage unfold like a spectator at a demolition site, equal parts awe and disbelief. "She's unraveling," Marcus said. "No," Word corrected. "She already unraveled. We're just seeing it publicly now." While Serena spiraled, the neighborhood began shifting in a way I never anticipated. People who once avoided eye contact now sought me out. People who had whispered doubts now shared their own horror stories. People who had been too afraid suddenly felt emboldened. Like Ellen Moore, who confessed Serena fined her $150 for inconsistent yard coloration. Or John Phelps, who received a citation because his garbage cans were visible for 20 minutes on collection day. Or Martin Lee, who was told his autistic son's swing set detracted from neighborhood cohesion. I listened one after another, feeling a mix of rage and resolve. Serena hadn't just targeted me, she had targeted everyone. I'd been the first to push back, but I wasn't the only one who had suffered. And the community, now seeing the truth in broad daylight, began moving towards something unexpected: unity. People invited us for dinner, they dropped off meals, they brought coffee by in the morning, they offered to help repair damage. What Serena had spent years fracturing, her downfall had begun to heal. And while I appreciated every gesture, I kept my focus forward, because we weren't done. Not by a long shot. I still had to protect my property legally to ensure no future HOA board could ever try something like this again. Which is why I finally called the one person Word insisted could handle a battle of this magnitude: Mara Langford. If attorneys were weapons, Mara was a guided missile. I had heard stories, how she dismantled a real estate conglomerate that had illegally seized farmland, how she mounted a class action lawsuit against a corrupt HOA in Dallas and won triple damages, how she once got a judge removed from a case after proving bias. When she walked into my home office for our first meeting, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. She sat, opened a notebook, and said, "Tell me everything, leave nothing out." I did. I told her every detail, from the first bulldozer, to the midnight sabotage, to the threats to my wife and daughter. I showed her Word's evidence, Marcus's footage, Renee's recording of Serena offering the bribe, all of it. She didn't react emotionally. She didn't gasp or frown or wince. She simply wrote. When I finished, she closed her notebook and said one sentence: "This is a RICO case." I blinked. Racketeering? That's organized crime laws. She nodded. That's exactly what this is. Coordinated harassment, financial coercion, abuse of authority, intimidation, extortion, fraudulent schemes, tampering with public records, conspirators in county office. It qualifies. I sat back. Racketeering? Against my HOA president? If I told you that even 3 months ago, I would have laughed. Now it felt inevitable. She continued, "We file after the state is done arresting the first round of people. Timing matters. Let them dig their graves deeper." "What happens when we file?" I asked. Mara gave me the coldest, calmest smile I had ever seen. "They will lose everything." The next blow didn't even come from my side. It came from Serena's own lawyer. He quit. Not quietly, he filed a motion stating irreconcilable ethical conflicts and client's lack of transparency. Translation: Serena lied to him, repeatedly, and he wasn't willing to drown with her. 2 days after that, Serena tried to return as acting HOA president, something so absurd I thought it was a joke when I first heard it. But no, she marched into the community center with her hair styled, her makeup flawless, and a stack of papers in her hand. Her face was strained, but her voice was still sharp. "I am still your elected president," she said to a crowd of nearly 50 residents. Someone in the back laughed. Someone else shouted, "You're a criminal." Another yelled, "We're done with you." Serena pointed at the crowd. "This community," she said, trembling with anger, "is ungrateful. None of you understood the vision I had for us." Someone shouted, "Your vision was to take our homes." Chaos erupted. Voices rose, people shouted, phones recorded every second. Serena tried to regain control, but the crowd rolled over her like a wave. It was the first time I'd ever seen her overwhelmed. She stormed out moments later, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The HOA vice president, a timid man named Floyd, announced immediately after, "New leadership vote next week, effective immediately. Serena Vale is suspended." The room erupted in applause. I didn't join. I just watched quietly. Because I knew her suspension wasn't enough to stop what was coming. It was only the prelude. The next collapse came from the insurance company. After reviewing Word's evidence and the arrest reports, they terminated the HOA's liability coverage due to intentional acts of board members, which meant every lawsuit, every damage claim, every environmental penalty, every financial misstep, The envelope Ward handed me that evening felt heavier than paper should, almost like it carried weight in a physical sense, the kind that settles into your bones the moment you touch it. Renee felt it too. She kept glancing at the manila edges like they were radioactive. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Ward took a slow breath. "Anonymous drop in my mailbox. No note, no fingerprints, just that envelope." I raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous?" He nodded, but whoever delivered it knew exactly what they were sending. I looked back down at the envelope. Something in my gut tightened, because whatever was inside wasn't just evidence. It felt like a confession, a warning, and the spark that was about to ignite the final stage of everything Serena had been hiding. I took the envelope inside. Renee and Lydia stayed in the kitchen, quietly talking, while Ward and I went to the dining room table. I set the envelope down between us. "You ready?" Ward asked. "Never," I said honestly, "but let's do it." I opened it carefully and slid out the contents. Thick stacks of photocopied documents, handwritten notes, emails, property plats, internal memos, bank transfers, scanned IDs, and even a few photos. The first page was a shock. A contractor invoice, large, detailed, and stamped paid in full. Not unusual by itself, but the signature caught my attention. Not Serena's, not any board members. It was Commissioner Marvin Blake's, the same brother-in-law suspended from county office just days earlier. Ward tapped the signature. "There's your link." I flipped through the next pages. More invoices. Emails discussing priority approval routing. Notes mentioning expedited boundary revisions for the Vale project. And then my street, my road, my land. Highlighted on a map attached to a cover letter written by Blake himself, instructing a county planner to integrate the Vale extension into Willow Ridge HOA boundaries pending formal adjustments. Ward leaned back. "That's the nail." "Wait," I said, scanning faster. "There's more." Emails between Serena and Blake, late-night messages, encrypted attachments, discussions of land acquisition timelines and projected revenues, and then came the page that made my jaw clench. A projected profit chart. The top line read, "Projected HOA expansion revenue. Phase 1. Projected amount $1.8 million. My road was listed as part of Phase 1. Ward whistled slowly. She wasn't trying to steal a driveway cow. She was trying to build an empire. I kept flipping. A plan to convert my road into a private toll lane for community maintenance fees. A plan to turn the back half of my acreage into a recreation zone funded by special assessments. A plan to expand Willow Ridge into a master community. Every one of those plans required one thing: my land. That was why she ignored survey markers, why she pushed illegal construction, why she harassed my daughter, why she threatened my wife, why she kept escalating. She wasn't just after property, she was after power, a multi-million-dollar development that hinged entirely on forcing me to submit. "Keep reading," Ward said quietly. I did. And then I found something worse. Something bigger than Blake, something bigger than the board, a spreadsheet labeled consultant fees. At first it looked normal, payment logs, line items, dates, but then a pattern emerged. Every major expense was routed through the same shell company, Cedar Brook Management Services. I recognized the name. It was one of the shell companies Ward had already identified as Serena's facade. But next to Cedar Brook was another column labeled recipient. And that's when the hammer dropped, because the payments didn't go to contractors or inspectors or labor crews. They went to individuals, people inside the community. Some were board members, some were administrative contacts, some were county employees, and one name, circled in red ink by the anonymous informant, jumped off the page with the force of a punch. Henry Lowell, my neighbor, my friend, the man who once brought over lemonade while our daughters played in the yard, the same man who stood in my garage during neighborhood meetings, the same man who had nodded sympathetically every time Serena crossed another line. Ward looked at me. I didn't want to believe it either. I set down the page slowly. "Henry," I whispered. Ward nodded grimly. He was feeding Serena information for months. My throat tightened. The late-night calls he'd told me he was ignoring, the way he always seemed to know when something was happening, the way he conveniently arrived just after major events, and the night my mailbox was vandalized, Henry insisted he saw nothing. Now I understood why. He didn't see nothing. He saw everything, and he hid it. I stared down at the paper, feeling anger mixed with something colder, betrayal. I turned the next page. A handwritten note from Serena, scanned, highlighted. "Ensure Henry monitor any legal movements from Cal. We need advance notice to counter moves before they escalate." Ward grimaced. She paid him. Good money, too. Several payments, all in amounts just under reporting thresholds. $3,500, $4,200, $2,950, $3,900, one every few weeks. Hundreds of pages of evidence. Dozens of payouts. It felt surreal. "He sold us out?" I whispered. There was no anger yet, just disbelief. Ward put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry. I know you trusted him." Loyalty is a strange thing. You think you know who stands with you, but pressure, money, fear, those things reveal people in ways you never expect. Henry hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed every neighbor who had stood against Serena. He betrayed the entire community. I flipped more pages. Emails between Henry and Serena. He kept her updated on every move I made, every petition I drafted, every meeting I attended, every call I made to the county, every time Ward came over. He even warned her when the sheriff planned to visit her office. Ward exhaled slowly. She only escaped charges earlier because Henry tipped her off. My hands curled into fists. How deep does this go? Ward closed his eyes briefly, then slid the last document my way. A scanned check. Made out to Henry. Memo line, final installment for cooperation. Amount $15,000, dated 3 days before Serena was arrested. 3 days. Henry was still cashing in while she spiraled. My mind reeled. "He's been playing both sides," I murmured. Ward nodded, "and cashing from one." I stared down at the check, feeling something inside me shift. Not rage, not yet, just clarity. Because this wasn't just a feud anymore. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was corruption, organized, planned, executed with precision, and Henry had been the mole inside my walls the entire time. When I finally walked back to the living room, Renee and Lydia looked up immediately. They could see it on my face. "What happened?" Renee whispered. I sat down slowly. "Henry is involved," I said quietly. Renee covered her mouth. Lydia's eyes went wide. "But he was always so kind," Lydia whispered. I forced myself to stay steady. He was pretending. He fed everything to Serena, every conversation, every plan, every moment he was near us, he was gathering information. Renee felt it before Lydia did, the mix of betrayal, anger, hurt. She sat down beside me, gripping my arm. "We trusted him," she said. "We let him in." Lydia's voice cracked. He lied to me too." That hit harder than anything. Henry had smiled at my daughter, talked with her, asked about her classes, pretended to care, and all while secretly updating Serena behind our backs. I forced myself to stay steady. "No more manipulation," I said quietly. Ward stepped inside. "We're handling this legally, strategically. Don't confront him emotionally. Use the evidence, always." I nodded. But inside a storm was brewing, because I already knew this wasn't the kind of betrayal you handled with polite conversation. This was a knife between the ribs, and knives get removed carefully. 2 days later, the HOA scheduled a special meeting, an emergency one, to address the avalanche of resignations, lawsuits, and investigations. The room was packed. Neighbors who never attended meetings before were suddenly front row eager. Reporters stood outside the building. Ward and Mara sat beside me, silent but attentive. Henry was there too. He avoided my eyes. He didn't look nervous. He looked exhausted, almost ashamed. But guilt wasn't enough after what he'd done. The interim board chair, a soft-spoken accountant named Patrice, opened the meeting. "As many of you know," she began shakily, "the association is undergoing substantial changes. Multiple investigations are ongoing. We urge residents to remain calm." The room buzzed angrily. Patrice cleared her throat. We will be transitioning to full external audit, financial oversight, and independent election monitoring. Translation, they finally admitted they couldn't be trusted. Then came the part everyone was waiting for. We will also be disclosing information pertaining to board member involvement in improper conduct. Henry stiffened. Patrice read slowly, her voice trembling. One of our residents, Mr. Henry Lowell, is under review for receiving improper payments from Cedar Brook Management Services. Gasps rippled through the room. Henry dropped his head. In exchange for sharing private resident information, obstructing legal processes, and coordinating with former President Serena Vale. Someone shouted, "Traitor!" Another yelled, "You endangered us all!" Henry stood slowly, turning toward the crowd. The anonymous warning sat on my desk like a living thing. 8 words, no signature, no hint of origin. This goes deeper than you think. Be ready. Those 8 words replayed in my head every time I closed my eyes. They whispered through conversations, sat like a weight behind every email, every phone call, every neighbor's knock on the door. For most people, the story ended when Serena was arrested. For some, it ended when her corruption leaked to the public. For others, it ended when Henry's betrayal was exposed. But I knew better. The warning wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. A glimpse into the next layer, the one no one wanted to look at. Ward sensed it too. So did Mara. So did Marcus. It was like all of us inhaled the same shift in the air at once. Something wasn't finished. Something was waiting. And as much as I wanted the entire nightmare to be over, I couldn't shake the truth. People like Serena aren't smart enough to build a conspiracy this big on their own. She was the face, the voice, the aggressor, the reckless one. But she wasn't the architect. Someone else had laid the foundation. Someone with connections, influence, power, not the loud, showy kind Serena loved to flaunt, but the quiet, strategic kind that moved through back doors and boardrooms. Someone who wasn't named in the envelope, because whoever sent it didn't dare write their name. That meant the real danger wasn't defeated. It was hiding, watching, waiting. 3 weeks passed after Henry's humiliation at the HOA meeting. Serena's case grew into a media sensation. News vans parked outside Willow Ridge so often that residents started calling it the paparazzi cul-de-sac. Every new revelation, embezzlement, fraud, bribery, environmental violations, harassment, added fuel to the fire. Serena went from a respected community figure to a regional punchline almost overnight. But her collapse didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Because I kept replaying the anonymous note. Be ready. For what? For who? And then, something happened that answered the question. On a chilly morning in late November, long before the sun rose, I woke to pounding at my front door. Not knocking, pounding. Urgent, fast, relentless. I grabbed a jacket and rushed downstairs. Renee and Lydia were startled awake. Ward, who had been staying in our guest room off and on while we prepared legal filings, came out instantly. "Stay behind me," I told them, and opened the door. 2 sheriff's deputies stood on the porch, breath fogging in the air. "Mr. Brennan?" one asked. "Yes. You need to come with us." My heart stopped. "Is my family in danger?" "Not at this moment," the deputy said carefully, "but you need to see something. Now." Ward stepped beside me. "I'm his counsel." "Then come too." We followed them outside. The wind stung my face. Frost sparkled across the lawns. The whole neighborhood was still asleep. The deputies led us to the far end of my property, the wooded area near the drainage ditch. And then I saw it. The ground had been dug up. Fresh dirt, shovel marks, a hole. And inside it, a metal box. Military style. Heavy. Old. Marcus, who must have been called earlier, stood near the digging site with Titan. His jaw was tight. "What is this?" I asked. He nodded toward the box. "Found it while checking the perimeter. Someone tried to bury it last night." One deputy knelt and pried it open. Inside were stacks of papers, dozens of flash drives, cash, Polaroids, maps, IDs, receipts, and on the very top, another note. Typed, short, cold. "You were never supposed to find this." My stomach churned. "Is this Serena's?" I asked. Ward shook his head immediately. "No, this isn't her style." The deputy pulled out the first folder. Inside were classified county documents, stamped confidential. Land acquisition proposals from years before I moved here, zoning maps that never went public, email printouts between a mysterious consultant and county officials, payment logs, private development drafts, blueprints, and in the center of everything, my property, highlighted in red. But it wasn't labeled as mine. It was labeled as Parcel B, reserved for corporate integration. What the? I whispered. Ward read faster. This isn't Serena's scheme. This predates her. This is older, bigger. Marcus's face hardened. This was planned long before she took over the HOA. Another folder contained bank statements, payments from several construction firms, investment groups, and one name that sent chills up my spine. Faraday Solutions, a private equity company, powerful, quiet, known for buying distressed properties. But why would they want my land? The deputy held up another document, a corporate memo stamped 4 years ago. Phase 1 expansion timeline, land acquisition required. High priority target, Parcel B, currently privately owned. I felt the air leave my lungs. Ward looked up at me slowly. You were never the target because of a driveway, Cal. You were the target because your land is the only thing standing between Faraday and a $40 million development. I staggered backward. 40 million? Not just millions, 40. Serena wasn't the mastermind. She was the pawn. The perfect pawn. Ambitious, narcissistic, power-hungry, willing to do anything for control. Whoever was really behind this didn't need to expose themselves. They only needed someone like her to execute their dirty work. And Henry? Just another disposable piece. Someone used Serena, I said quietly. Someone used all of us. Ward nodded grimly. And someone buried this box last night because they panicked. But panicked about what? Renee asked softly. That question was answered seconds later. Another deputy approached with a clear evidence bag. Inside was a phone. An older model, cracked screen, still buzzing with missed calls. And taped to the back was a piece of white paper with a handwritten message. He knows. I frowned. Who knows what? The deputy shook his head. We don't know. The phone was found near the ditch. Whoever dropped it ran. Marcus pointed to Titan's body cam. I got movement at 3:17 a.m. One person, hooded, small frame. They bolted the moment Titan barked. Ward rubbed his mouth. Someone tried to hide this evidence because they were afraid it would lead back to them. And they failed, I said. The deputy shut the metal box. You need to come to the station. There's more. 2 hours later, sitting in a small conference room at the sheriff's office, I finally learned the truth. Faraday Solutions had been quietly acquiring land all across the county, buying out farms, purchasing foreclosures, pressuring small owners. But one piece was never available. Mine. My land was not just inconvenient, it was essential. Without it, Faraday's project couldn't pass state requirements. They needed a continuous land stretch. They had everything except my property. So, they got creative. They embedded contractors inside community organizations. They funded local campaigns. They pressured officials. They forged relationships. They planted people. And then, when that wasn't enough, they weaponized the HOA. Serena had been recruited, told she'd gain influence, told she'd get support, told the HOA could expand under her leadership. In exchange, all she had to do was encourage compliance from me. But as her obsession spiraled, Faraday stepped back, quietly distancing themselves. That was the missing piece. That's why the envelope was anonymous, Ward murmured. Someone in their operation panicked and threw her under the bus. The sheriff nodded. We believe someone within Faraday realized Serena was going to crack and didn't want to go down with her. Who? I asked. We don't know yet, the sheriff said, but we're getting close. I stared at the evidence photos, the buried box, the maps, the contracts, all this chaos, because of my land, my driveway, my home, my family. A tremor of fury ran through me. They came after my child, I said quietly. They came after my wife. They threatened us. They vandalized our house. They sent people in the night. Ward nodded. And now we take everything from them. Mara arrived shortly afterward. When she saw the evidence, her expression hardened into something fierce. This is bigger than a lawsuit. This is a federal racketeering case. Multi-agency, multi-year investigation. They'll go after every person, every connection, every dollar trail. Good, Renee whispered. More than that, Mara added. You're entitled to damages, massive damages. I didn't care about damages. I cared about stopping whoever had orchestrated this. Who's the boss? I asked quietly. Who approved the plan? The sheriff exchanged a look with an investigator, then slid a final document toward me. A printed email. Subject line, Phase 1, Acquisition Strategy.